This morning, the school year's first bell is also an alarm bell as schools nationwide struggle to find enough teachers.
There is a growing crisis in American education, an extreme shortage of teachers.
The U.S. is coping with a nationwide shortage of teachers, numbering in the hundreds of thousands.
Hey there, my name is James Lee. Welcome to my channel 5149, where I talk business, politics, and society. And today's segment, I'm going to title Education on Fire. We're going to talk about what you maybe have been hearing in the news about the teacher shortage situation, but also major aspects of the issue that I think the media has been ignoring.
The men and women who educate our children are increasingly burnt out, struggling with the aftermath of 2+ years of the pandemic, increasing scrutiny over curriculums that has put many of them at the center of educational culture wars, not to mention fears for their own safety. And oh, by the way, there's always that issue of low pay. Nationwide, there are more than 280,000 fewer teachers now than at the start of the pandemic. 280,000!
280,000! Chuck Todd shocked him so much that he had to read that twice. Anyway, doesn't sound ideal, and although we don't know exactly how many U.S. classrooms are short teachers for the next school year, there is no national database that tracks the issue. We can look at state and district level reports to try and contextualize how bad the situation actually is. According to reporting from the Washington Post, the Nevada State Education Association estimated that roughly 3,000 teaching jobs remain unfilled across the state's 17 school districts as of early August. In a January report, the Illinois Association of Regional School Superintendents found that 88% of school districts statewide were, quote, having problems with teacher shortages, while 2,040 teacher openings were either empty or filled with a less than qualified hire. And in the Houston area, the largest 5 school districts are all reporting that between 200 and 1,000 teaching positions remain open.
I'm a teacher. All I need are minds for molding.
Yes, but teachers might need a few other things, like not being overworked to the point of burning out, or not being paid like trash, or not being constantly disrespected by parents, or not dealing with a bunch of bureaucratic nonsense. So the situation we're left with today is that we got plenty of young minds to mold, but no one to do the molding. So what exactly is going on here, and what are the solutions?
But we're calling for a federal government involvement, the state involvement. In our state, we're seeing this investment in education. We had a 0-0 added to our public school funding in terms of investment from our Joint Finance Committee. We can't continue to do this. Wisconsin's right now always within that 1 to 3 in terms of the lowest performance of investing in public education.
That was Carlton Jenkins, superintendent of Madison's Metropolitan School District. He talked about funding, which brings us to the meat of today's discussion and the meat of this segment, where we, as usual, follow the money in search of the truth. And when I think of funding for public education, my intuition, based on most of the media coverage I've seen, is that it's lacking and presumably it's being diverted elsewhere. But when I did more research, the reality is a bit more nuanced than that. According to data from the OECD, the US is actually second in the world when it comes to education spending per student, roughly $34,000 a year, about double that of the OECD average, and only trailing Luxembourg. So that's pretty good. But the US does not make the top of the list for teachers' salaries, lagging behind nations like Ireland, the Netherlands, Germany, and Canada, which also spend less per pupil. So I think we have to start asking, where is all the money going if not to the teachers? Well, according to a 2018 OECD report, America spends higher proportions of education dollars on non-teaching staff, 27% of US spending compared to the OECD average of 15%, and devotes a lower proportion of education spending on teacher compensation, 54% compared to the OECD average of 63%. And these administrative and support staff costs continue to grow. Administrative staff numbers have grown over 5 times faster than student populations in public schools since 2000. That is a bit peculiar. Admin staff growing faster than student populations. Let's read on. One of the major reasons behind these spending patterns is American dependence on school districts. While many European and Asian countries don't have separate elected bodies to administer public education, The United States is somewhat unique in that it has thousands of locally elected school districts, many of which are quite small. This equates to hundreds of thousands of administrators, and so lots of dollars not going to teachers. I think that is interesting, because when NBC News, Meet the Press, and other programs like that bring on school district superintendents like Carl Jenkins to talk solutions and how we can solve our education crisis, they're not going to say, well, my role is technically redundant, so you guys can go ahead and eliminate my job so we can pay teachers more. No way. Naturally, to them, the problem can't be the bureaucracy and the administration, so the solution must be elsewhere.
These shortages have forced some state and local governments to take some drastic steps to attract more candidates or keep schools open. Let me tell you about Alabama. They've had to lower their requirements to receive a teaching certificate. Boy, that's uplifting. Some districts in rural Texas that are struggling to find teachers have decided to move to 4-day school weeks. Want to talk about uneven educational outcomes? Then there's Florida. They're turning to military veterans, some of whom don't have bachelor's degrees at all, to lead these classrooms.
I don't think those are the best ideas. I'm scratching my head a little bit. Is it possible that school administrators, perhaps knowing full well where the solutions lie, are maybe okay with a teacher shortage in the name of self-preservation? Nancy Bailey, author of Losing America's Schools, The Fight to Reclaim Public Education, wrote back in 2016, those in charge of public schools and politicians are hypocrites when it comes to the rhetoric surrounding a teacher shortage. School districts around the country are describing hundreds of classrooms they can't seem to fill with qualified teachers. This has been a manipulated ploy to get rid of veteran teachers and employ alternative, revolving door, unqualified teachers who will settle for smaller salaries. Right. So in the U.S., we seem to be having a situation where there's a large educational bureaucracy who are in charge of budget allocation for public schools, dealing with a teacher shortage that arguably they manufactured. And there are a few levers they can pull. The one they don't want to pull, of course, is anything that would threaten their position of power. So they pull on a few other levers, like creating an environment that creates a downward pressure on teachers' wages, which has been happening for quite some time now. Or they can outsource, meaning that they can privatize public education. For example, on your screen is a paper put out by DC's Office of the State Superintendent of Education entitled High Dosage Learning, a Proven Strategy to Accelerate Student Learning. High dosage learning is basically a fancy schmancy term for one-on-one tutoring, and that is apparently the answer our school boards and our government are pushing for. According to the Network for Public Education, Democrats want tutors and Republicans want tutors. When they agree like that, we should all be a little bit skeptical, or at least I am. Citing Nancy Bailey again, quote, "Where is the focus on teachers? Instead, tutors are touted as providing personalized learning, eerily what Americans were told about technology." Future Ed, a think tank out of George Washington University made up of Teach for America types, some from the Broad Institute, promote tutors in the case for a national tutoring system. They're funded by the Barr Foundation, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, the Carnegie Corporation of New York, the Citi Fund, the Joyce Foundation, the Overdeck Family Foundation, and the Walton Family Foundation. Okay, so to connect the dots a little bit, the push for tutors to replace teachers seemed to be coming down to protecting the interests of the wealthy and the powerful, because remember, nonprofits like the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation don't exist to address any fundamental problems in society, or at least that's really not their top priority, but rather those organizations exist to protect their own status and the status of its patrons, right? Promoting tutoring as a mechanism to augment public school education will necessarily create this bifurcation of opportunity. One group who has access to a tutor and another who doesn't. And on top of that, it injects a profit incentive, a money-making opportunity into public K-12 education, something that could prove very beneficial to a certain class of folks who, let's be real, form this kind of symbiotic relationship with these opaque nonprofit organizations. In fact, according to industry estimates, between 2020 and 2025, the private tutoring market in the U.S. is expected to grow by over 8% year over year, roughly $8.37 billion.
I'm a PhD student who's studying teacher attrition and the long-term impacts it's having on our field. Class sizes will be so large that individual teachers, either legally or physically or both, can't handle them. And so students are going to get pushed out into large group sessions that have a person who's supervising them. The person supervising them isn't necessarily going to be a teacher. Think more like a lunchroom monitor situation. And the students will be doing like a Khan Academy or otherwise online learning platform. This will likely take place in a cafeteria, in a gym, or just a really large classroom. And they'll be in there on their headphones and laptops learning and being supervised by a human. I'm using the word teacher lightly because it's really just going to be an adult in the room who maybe passed a background check. So school attendance will still be mandatory, but it won't truly be school. It won't be a place of education, fostering learning, supporting disabilities. So what you're witnessing is the absolute deprofessionalization of teaching and shifting it from a career to a gig industry.
Imagine that future, a country where teaching will no longer be a career, but just a gig. Classrooms staffed with independent contractors who aren't invested at all in education necessarily, but who are there simply to trade his or her time for an hourly wage, most likely with minimal benefits. So to sum it up, yes, we do have a teacher shortage, no doubt, but we also have a large bureaucratic network of administrators and private interests siphoning off public resources, crippling teachers and students, all while pushing for mass privatization of the public education system for the sake of their own self-preservation and profit generation. You know, my final thought on this is that public education shouldn't be a marketing ploy, another revenue stream for rich and wealthy people. Public education is maybe literally the ideal example of a long-term investment in the future of your country, our country. You make that investment now to create this strong foundation from which to build a nation, and that's, I think, part of the legacy of what's made America so successful. But if we continue to allow our public education system to deteriorate through greed, through privatization, this will result in numerous downstream catastrophic effects on our communities or society that I don't know if we can recover from. That is it for me this week. I hope you found this video to be helpful. I'm obviously not a teacher, so these are just my observations and thoughts that I've gathered. If you're a teacher or just another concerned citizen, please let me know what your thoughts are in the comment section below. If you've enjoyed this video and you do want to support my work, please click on that like button, share this video, consider subscribing, and clicking on that notification bell icon so you can be the first to watch each week. And as always, thank you so much for your time. I'll see you next week.